To introduce you to Python, we're going to start with the basics, gradually getting more complex as we work through the course. The first programming concept we'll be learning about is variables. Variables are simply identifiers that point to a reserved space in memory in which we can store values or data. Every time we create a new variable, we're essentially reserving a space in memory to store something. Think of a variable as an address to a storage unit. You can use the storage unit to store items, and you can return later to access those items at any time. In programming, variables act in much the same way. So we can store data in memory, that is the storage unit, and later use our variables, the address, to access the data whenever it's needed. In a new Dynamo file, let's have a look at creating our own variables in Python. Go ahead and place a new Python script node. To start, let's simply input some data into Python and use a variable to store it. To do this, let's search for the slider node by hitting the right mouse button and typing slider, then selecting integer slider, and then input this into input 0. Then open up Python. To create a variable, we simply need to name it and then assign data to it using the equals symbol. So for example, let's remove the code on line 7, and we'll create a new variable named value and assign to this the input at port 0. This is known as assigning a value to a variable. The input data is now stored under the value variable. Let's output that variable by assigning it to out and see what we get. Go ahead and hit run and look at the Python preview. Perfect. So you can see that we have output our variable, which is storing the data we are sending in. We can also create data within Python by creating a variable and assigning a value to it. So for example, we could create a variable named var1 and then assign to this 1, which means we've created a number data type within Python. Or we could create a piece of geometry by assigning it to var2, for example. A point is now stored in memory, which we can access by using this var2 variable. Let's have a look by assigning var2 to out and hitting run. Perfect. So you can see we have a new point, which is stored under var2. In Python, we can reassign variables by simply using the same variable name. For example, let's change the number stored at var1 to 2 by writing var1 equals 2. We can do this because Python is what's called a dynamically typed language, which means the variable and the data are not bound, so the variable can store any data type. And as var1 equals 2 occurs after var1 equals 1, we should get the value 2 when we output it. So let's output var1. Great, so we have 2. As the variable represents the value it stores, they can be used directly in operations, such as addition. To demonstrate this, let's make another variable, say var3, and we'll assign to this var1 plus 2. As var1 is storing 2, var3 should now be storing 4. So let's output var3 and have a look. Perfect. So it is storing 4. When creating variables in Python, there are a few naming conventions to look out for. Variable names can contain letters, numbers, and underscores. However, we can't use numbers to start. For example, let's try creating a variable 3var equals 1. And then hit run. This produces an error, which is unexpected token var. This is because we have started the line with 3. Python doesn't recognize var as then being a variable. We also can't use symbols in our variable names. For example, let's try %var equals 2. Then hit run. And if we comment out the previous error, hit run again, you can see we still get an error which is unexpected token %. This is because Python does not recognize the modulus symbol at this position. When creating variables, also be careful when using capitalization too. as Python is case sensitive. For example, if we create two variables, var1 equals 1 and var1 equals 2, differentiated by the capital V letters, we should have two variables. First comment out %var, and then let's output var1, comma, then var1 with a capital V, and hit run. And you can see we get the two different numbers as we've created two different variables. This can often lead to unexpected errors, so it's something to keep an eye on when working with variables. Finally, in Python there are words known as keywords or reserved words that we simply can't use as Python has a use for them already. We know if a word is a keyword when it turns up red. So looking at our script already, we can see that there are two different keywords, import and from. If we try to use one of these as a variable, for example, from equals 1, and hit run, you can see that we get the error invalid syntax. This is because keywords can't be assigned to. These are some of the fundamentals that we need to know when working with variables. With this base understanding, let's start working with some of the different data types in Python, using variables to store them as we go.